And there we go. Good morning, everybody. Aaron, I'm so glad you're here. Humberto, good morning. And I think Candace, is that you? Good morning. Good morning. And welcome to our class. Welcome back and welcome, Candace. You joined late, but caught up fast and even getting ahead of me. So kudos to you. I want to wish you all a happy National Teachers Day. What a great day to meet together as teachers and as learners. It's a good way to kick off Teacher Appreciation Week, isn't it? So I just again want to thank you for your very active participation in the Moodle course. The requirement was that you respond to 2 people, and each of you have gone well and above that. You're responding to everything and everybody, and I love it. It's really great. And that is very important because indeed that was one of our objectives for this course, was to create an online learning community. And I think that we've done that with our small little group. So thank you. Just move forward. So since we met before and started this course, I hope you have solidified your understanding and appreciation of what you do managing the multi-level ESL class. And I hope you have picked up some strategies and tips to help you manage your MESL class a little bit better. So I also hope that you've started thinking about your multi-level lesson plan that you will submit by the end of the week. And perhaps tried to implement a few strategies in likability or crossability pairing. And I'm sure that you enjoyed watching that video. Just a little shout out to that video. It took me a while to clue into the fact that this was from the ESL Teacher Institute. Now, don't quote me on this, but my recollection is that that came about in the end of the 80s. I don't know exactly when it started, but when I started in adult ed in California in 1990, I attended many ESL Teacher Institutes. And I've got to tell you that they were a mainstay and a huge resource and support for me. And I have come to understand in watching the video in this past 2 weeks ago, I realized, oh my goodness, I'm still doing those things that I learned in the ESL Teacher Institute and like we saw on the video. So that was exciting for me to be re-inspired by all of that. Speaking of the video, if we have a little bit of a recap of the video, was very entertaining, and it reminded me why I love ESL teaching so much. But you remember that the teacher brought her own experience into the lesson. And I think that that was very powerful because, like it or not, our students are keenly interested in us. And anything that is real and important to us, they tend to pay attention to and are immediately engaged. I love the use of realia. I found myself thinking, now how can I make realia real in a Zoom setting, a little more real? It's not like I have handcuffs that I can whip out and show people, but we can, and maybe the fake gun isn't appropriate these days. But anyway, also very powerful was the strong use of visuals, not just the pictures, but the words and the phrases and the language structures were shown. One of the things that I've observed in all kinds of teaching and training is that sometimes there's picture visuals, but there's not the words that go along. I think that learners need to see words, whether they're even first language learners need to see pictures and words at the same time that they're hearing them. So the role playing was really fun. Let me just say a little bit about role play here, and I'll say more about it later. But I have found in these 30 years of teaching that students love role play. You wouldn't think, you'd think that they'd be too shy or intimidated, right? But it turns out they actually love role playing at all levels of language ability. And I think it's very entertaining. It's funny. I think it's bonding. And I think it builds that community. And we can't say enough about practice. I know that in preparing this webinar for you, I practiced a little bit, absolutely, because you perform differently cold turkey. And if our students have a safe environment to practice certain language structures and content in the classroom, well then it's much more likely that they're able to have success with it outside of the classroom. The other reason that, this is just me adding this, that role playing is so important because it puts the students center stage instead of the teacher. And as we recall in our first webinar, that's something that we're trying to share the stage and not be on the stage all the time as a teacher. So you also notice that the assessments in the beginning level group were being performed by an instructional aide. Wow, an instructional aide, a paraprofessional. That's a true luxury, isn't it? So usually that's something that everybody comments, what a great thing it would be to have a paraprofessional in your class. In the 90s, I think it was more common. I had a paid paraprofessional in my classroom with me, but that all changed. I think for most institutions can no longer afford that. If it still exists in your schools, yay! I have something else to say about that. Volunteers can be used, teacher wannabes, maybe high school students that want community service credit could be called in. That's kind of tricky business, so I don't want to go into too much detail, but just give you a little bit of my professional insight on that. Yes, it's very helpful to students and can be helpful to the teacher as well, but the teacher does need to be mindful that this is another managing piece. I've always looked at it that way, managing how the paraprofessional works with students to make the greatest impact on the students. It does take some upfront planning and effort, but the payoff is really worth it. So this week, we've been introduced to a background reading, which talks about the importance of class unity. We've already discussed and read about how important building the classroom community is. And one of the ways that we can do that in a MESL class, I'm going to say MESL, or I'll mess it up, is presenting, keeping the same topic for the whole class and just developing different level materials. In this way, the students feel more connected. Just like when we watch a movie together with family or friends, or we chat with a friend about an episode in a drama that we're watching, this is kind of a shared experience and it helps build that community. So as we saw in the video, the topic was reporting a crime. So first we choose a topic, and it can be based on the Common Core or the EL Civics objectives or our class curriculum. We select a topic, and it could be, for example, American culture. And the idea is it's all the same topic, the levels and the activities and the work is differentiated. So in the warm-up and the introduction, the topic is introduced, and the whole class knows what the objective for the day is. And you do that using pictures and lots of visuals and lots of audio repetition and you do this to the whole class. I have to confess that sometimes I'm looking at my notes because there's certain things that you don't want to forget to share as your facilitator and as your colleague. Based on some of my internal thinking about all of this, I want to confess that sometimes I feel a little nervous. Sometimes, even after 30 years, there's this part of me that thinks, am I hitting them correctly? Am I confusing my lower level students? Am I boring my upper level students? But the more I think about it, the more I realize is that if it's engaging enough, if it's entertaining enough, if it's visual enough, it's really okay. Because in the start of class, everybody's kind of acclimating and getting into the learning zone. And I think it really works well. And remember, and we'll touch on this again a few slides down the road, remember that you can always re-present or present again to your beginning level group when the advanced and intermediate groups are working on another activity. So hold that thought for a minute. So again, lots of visuals. If you were doing an American topic, you could come up with better ideas than maybe are here, or additional ideas, or maybe even than I could. But talking about the flag, or maybe Thanksgiving, which is a very American thing, and then some symbols of our country. The USCIS website has incredible materials online that you could share with students, and anything to do with citizenship prep. So in the presentation stage, as we know, I kind of jumped ahead a little bit. I was addressing in the presentation stage, I'm also, often kind of worried about just confusing my lower level students or boring my upper level students. But as long as they're acclimating and getting into the vibe of the lesson, I think it really works. One thing that you could do is, in this case, is use a closed reading activity about the flag or about Thanksgiving. This is an example at a beginning level. It's when the reading has blanks, and together the class can help fill in the blanks. And then in the end, perhaps using a video to reinforce what was read. And that, again, the whole goal of the presentation is to present the new information across all ability levels in an engaging way that gets everybody on the same page and ready to work in their likability groups in the practice stage. So just some grouping students basics moving forward with this idea is to avoid using labels. And I think this came up in our first webinar. One of our participants brought up a very good point about this. We don't have to label it. We don't have to say that you are my low students, you are my high students. We don't have to say that. Students can figure it out. It can be very transparent just by the fact that these are the groups that are there, and they can notice who's in the upper level group, or and maybe calling the groups A, B, and C as they did in the video would be useful. As far as what you can use to assist you in making those groups initially is using the intake placement test. And that would be in the beginning of your class, like the first couple weeks before you know your students very well, before you've observed them, right? And that would help you in making those groups in the beginning. And as through class observation, teacher observation, and little assessments that you do throughout the days and the weeks, you can juggle those groups a little bit. One tip here is about pairing and partnering shy students with a more social student It's an interesting strategy. You get two shy students together and maybe no communication happens. And if you get two social students together, well, maybe they take over your whole class. Who knows? Again, it's just a tip that you can use. You know your students best. And you know how to zero in and clue in how to group them and which students are going to work better with each other. So we're going to go to the chat, and I would like you to type in, give you about a couple minutes, how you group your students. Now, there's many, many, many ways to group students. We're not necessarily talking about likability or crossability right now, but any way that you put your students together. It could be random count-offs, sometimes for, I'm gonna pull up the chat and start seeing. Yes, that's US. I'll just type that in. Somebody asked about the resource. It's USCIS. And right now, the acronym is evading my brain, but it's USCIS. If you just Google that resource for citizenship prep, great materials on that website. So let's see, levels, where they are from, high and low, let them pick. I love that. Yes, let them pick, mix it up. Oh yeah, every day I try to do a little bit grouping a little bit differently. Any other ideas? Sometimes because of time, I may have them just turn to the person on their left or turn to the person on their right or the person behind them. That's just random count-offs. I use sometimes matchups. I've heard lots of teachers use matchups. One student has a card with a vocabulary word, another student has a picture, and they find each other that way. I rely upon my old faithful that I always have in my teaching bag, and that is my deck of cards. If you've ever done any grouping with a deck of cards, it's really good. I don't want to take too much time to go into it. There is something important that, thanks for sharing everybody, something important that I want to say here, and that all grouping is good. There's some grouping that's better for some activities and at different times in the lesson. And so what I'm saying is that sometimes we need to be more intentional in our grouping strategies. Random is fine, for example, when we're doing a warm-up or a mixer or just trying to build that community, then random, all of those fun little matchup ways are really good. But when it comes to other types of grouping, we need to be more planned and more intentional. Speaking of more planned and more intentional, when we're doing likability grouping, we need to actually pre-plan, or it can't be just random. We need to put these groups together ourselves. So remember, the teacher is working with each level, and he or she rotates around the group. Each group has assigned tasks, and each group that they need to work on together. And for example, if we were doing, let's say, vocabulary development activity. The low beginning group perhaps would draw a picture about the vocabulary word and then label the picture. The high beginning group might find the definition of the word and use it in a sample sentence. Note from teacher Gretchen, your colleague, I don't let students make generic sample sentences. I make them write them about themselves, their family, their classmate, their teacher, their classroom, just to make it more real. Just as a side note. And then the intermediate and advanced group, the intermediate group could be doing a closed reading activity using vocabulary words, filling in the blanks with the vocabulary words. And then the advanced group could actually have the vocabulary words and be told to write a paragraph about the topic with that. So that's an example of how the activity can be differentiated. Also on likability groups going forward, it's very important to set time for all the groups. It could be 20 minutes to do the task. It could be a little more. It could be a little less. Each group will have a time police. I like to say a timekeeper. And there's a separate evaluation for each group. And the evaluations could look something like this for the beginning group. What did you draw? Show me what you drew. What is the name of that? In the higher beginning ESL group, oops, should have had beginning there. What is the definition of your word? Maybe for the intermediate, what is the context of the word? Or why don't you share your sample sentence? And then for the advanced, they could talk about or show you what the topic of their sentence or where the supporting details of the paragraph are. So what about you? How have you used likability grouping in the past? If you would please take some time to share your response or your ideas in the chat. I do the same thing you do with breakout rooms.
This is Erin. Hi. Can you go back to the slide before that, please?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Hold on.
When you got to this one, my mind just went blank. Oh, I'm sorry. The likability one. Was there a likability one?
Yes, I'm getting there.
Oh, okay.
This one or the one prior? There was 2 likability slides.
Yeah, the first one, please.
Uh-huh.
Oh, okay. I have this. Thank you.
Got it?
Yeah, thanks.
Sure. Okay, back to the chat. I make a group for just them or during office hours, good. Breakout rooms are still a challenge for the group. They are, but they also lend the opportunity for students to work together and get to know each other a little bit better. Good, thank you. So we will move on. So next, after the likability, we have the cross-ability grouping. This is the type of grouping that we also need to make in advance. And the idea is that in each group, there's all levels. For example, in group 1, you might have a beginning level, a beginning high, an intermediate level, and an advanced. Ideally, a group has to be 3 or 4 people. More than 4 is a little bit complex, could be, but 2 is not a group, 2 is a pair, so we need 3 or 4. In the video, she grouped things, and you'll see later in the lesson plan, she grouped people in 3s. But for cross-ability grouping, 4 is great. One of the strategies that I see, or one of the things that I see, if you have those 3 groups, right? You have your beginning group, you have your intermediate group, and you have your advanced group, your likability groups. Well, one of the things I would do is I would just, while they were working, quickly look at my groups, because every day you have some different students there, right? You can't make your cross-ability groups very well at the night before your lesson, because you never know exactly who's going to be there. But while they're in their likability groups for the day, I would just look at each of the groups and pick a person from each group to go into the cross-ability grouping. I hope that's not confusing, but it was a very easy way to do it in the moment. And because invariably I would have to redo them when certain people didn't show up. Remember, if you have 4 people in a group, that lends itself well for 2 pairs in the group. The other strategy that I used to use in crossability is if I had a brand new student, that maybe it was their first week in the room, or a super intimidated, very, very shy student, until they got used to the crossability groups, sometimes I would pair them up. So for example, if I had a brand new student in the intermediate group, I might send 2 intermediate students into a 4-person crossability group, so they wouldn't be going alone. They'd have a partner in the group to rely on. It was just a strategy I developed over time. It's very important that each student takes a part to achieve an end result. And if you have a group of 4, then my part, and if I'm one of 4, my part is 25% of the whole, which means if I don't participate or if I don't do my share, the group will only achieve 75%. The most important thing I think here is about this teaches teamwork, and that's a work readiness skill. Over time, I will touch upon this again later, but over time, I let students self-select for choice and autonomy. The other thing is that teamwork is where some of those soft skills and those language functions, negotiating, meaning, cooperative type language skills start to emerge. And that's the communicative piece, the real communicative piece. A little bit more here about cross-ability grouping. Some of it I've already mentioned, but each person in the group has an additional task. So the whole group has a job or a task that they must complete together, but each individual has a job: a timekeeper, a note taker, somebody who writes, somebody who reads the information, so kind of the speaker, and then the reporter, somebody who reports back to the whole class. It's very important to choose the task depending on the level of the participant in the group. For example, typically the timekeeper could be a beginning level student because it doesn't need as much communicative or English language skills to do it. The note taker could be an intermediate or a beginning high, or somebody who with strong writing skills, and so on. And typically the reporter is typically the advanced student who has more confidence with their language skills. However, again, I want to say that in the beginning, I assigned the roles in the groups, but over time, I let students self-select, and that's part of choice and autonomy. So the goal here is for students to learn from each other, to collaborate and cooperate with each other. This indeed mirrors the world that we live in, the world of work and the world of any other community activity and that we're a part of. So very important to remember that the teacher's role here is to facilitate this process and give this opportunity for this real life communication skills and to assist each group. So before we move on, have you used cross-ability grouping in the past? If you could please write about your experience in the chat. So, same as above, online and in the class in person. Great. I think this is the whole group experience for us. We are a small group. That's a very good point. Yeah, if you have a class of 5 or 6 people, sometimes that's your group, right? That becomes your whole group. Yeah. It was fun to see how it works, though, in the video when you have a large class. It was fun to see that. Okay. Again, if you have nothing else to share, we can move on. But again, I think I shared earlier briefly, one of my strategies is to look and see who's in the class and create the crossability based on the like ability or the different leveled people that were there. And that really helped me a lot with my classroom management. So moving on, we'll talk about closing activities. And I really think it's very important, and the materials online that in our class discuss this, but I believe personally it's very important that we bring our class back together. And I think that you have enough experience to agree with me. It could be anything. It could be something really, really simple, but we start out together as a whole group. We break into our likability groups and our crossability groups, and then we come back together as a whole before we assign an outside activity and before we say goodbye and thank you for coming to class. So group presentations, role playing, there's many, many ways to have closure. It could have been the out of class related activity that was assigned the class before that students have a chance to share if they did their homework. It could be something like that. This reinforces the main vocabulary or grammar lesson or the content that was presented and taught, but it also reinforces community. So, and I'm a closure person. I always ended class in some way like this. I didn't just stop the groups. Okay, bye, see you tomorrow. I'll always bring them back together. I think it's good. Moving on to materials. Some of the content on the Moodle course for this week talks about materials. Of course, there's commercial materials from publishers, maybe not very many materials that actually designate certain different levels within the text, but there are textbooks that do that. There's teacher created materials like videos and Google Slides. There's stuff from that you borrow from colleagues or even student created. So what kind of materials do you use? In the chat, I'm not necessarily asking you to call out the name of the textbook or name of the series that you use, although you can, but you don't have to. Some types of materials that you use. Where do you find them? Oh, yes. Huge variety. It kind of makes me giggle because the tons and tons of books that I have that I pull from is kind of mind-numbing sometimes, but absolutely love News for You. Love it. Computer-based program, teacher created, some beginning colleague sharing. I use Ventures. Thanks. Hi, Ventures is very good. One thing about News for You, or any, intermediate type, beginning, high, intermediate type level material, something that I've seen other people do and I've done myself is that you can take an article or a text that's at that beginning, high, intermediate, low level and you can create something at the same topic, the same material, but create something lower to go with it and create something higher to go with it. So many online materials. There's PowerPoints, projects from students can be materials. There's websites and recorded lessons. Something right here, something about seasoned books. For me, that means some of those old classic textbooks that maybe are out of print and maybe outdated, and maybe some of the pictures aren't relevant, or some of the topics are not relevant, or they're outdated, but they can have some real gems inside them, can't they? Like a couple pages. And because they're out of print, I think we can copy them and then use them in the classroom. So got a lot of old textbooks sitting, well, now in my garage. I retired last year, but I didn't want to throw them away because they're such gems and they're very usable. So thank you for sharing. We will move on to the 3 podcasts, just briefly looking at the 3 podcasts that you're going to be listening to. I see that some of you already did listen to them, but podcast 3 is going to talk about the 7 stages of a lesson. And you're saying, wait, what? I thought it was 6 stages of a lesson. Well, now it's 7. And I will highlight that. We have the warm up and review, the introduction where you state the overall classroom objective. It's very important, by the way, for students to know on the onset of the class. I always have the objective in simple English and simple terms on the board. It can, you can tell them what SLOW, I think they're called SLOWs now, school-wide learning outcome that you're matching up to, or maybe a civics objective. Remember, the presentation part is whole group, and making it fun and interactive and engaging for all levels. The guided practice, the practice which is guided, is the group work, both likability and crossability. And that's where the communicative piece comes up is when they're using their new skill that they learned in their likability group in a new context, with a new task in their crossability group. And that's where the communicative language function, the real language, comes up. The evaluation is just a quick snapshot of the content of mastery. Could be a quiz or a test, but could be anything. For example, show me that you know how to do this, and then the application. So that's podcast 3. In podcast 4, group work that works, number 1. Some of the tips that you will listen to is that placing students in likability group is for the content. The likability group is where they learn the content. In the crossability is where they have some sort of jigsaw activity where they use the content, what they've learned in the content in their likability group, and apply it in the crossability group, and they train others. And the advice or the recommendation is that you do the likability first, makes sense, and then the crossability. And it's the crossability grouping or work that builds the fluency, because that's where the real language, they're learning to talk about what they've learned and communicate what they've learned and teach others, and having the timekeeper to stay on task is a very strong recommendation. In podcast 5, it stresses the importance of the jobs in a group being based on the language skills and level. In time, people can, like I said, can self-select, but typically the job of the timekeeper will be the lower level student, and the reporter would be a higher level student, maybe not the advanced. So I know that this is a common challenge that we have, that sometimes the advanced level students can dominate the group work or the classroom or the classwork. But it's an opportunity to practice problem solving skills and sharing airtime. But one thing that I think is very interesting is having a timekeeper. Typically it's a beginning level student. So the beginning level student maybe they have limited language skills, but they've been given a very important balance of power job. So you might have the advanced student that's more talkative and more dominating, but you have a timekeeper. And one thing that I failed to mention before in the other slides, I think it's very important that we help our students learn what their job is and what their role is, and how to the language that they need for their role. For example, I have a few ideas written down. Teach the students what the role does and what the person in that role says. We are halfway through. It's time to wrap it up. We're running out of time. We have 2 minutes left. And even teach them maybe the gestures and verbal clues and gestures that goes along with that. I think that's a good idea. I like that idea. I got that from these podcasts. So we're ready to talk a little bit again about the WIPEA model. And this will help you when you develop your MESL lesson plan that is due at the end of week 4. So again, the warm-up is tapping into your students' prior knowledge, getting them all acclimated and focused on the objective of the class. And in the introduction, you're giving the big picture of what the content of the class is going to be. The presentation teaches the lesson and content. The practice, the guided practice, both the like and cross ability group work. The evaluation assesses what was learned, and the application is some sort of simple, the evaluation can be something as simple as show me what you've learned, or a role play. The application can be some simple activity that you ask them to do outside the class. Now, this is the lesson plan form that we will be using to create our lesson in week 4. You can see that at the top, the overall class objective is there, and it breaks into the beginner objective, the intermediate objective, and the advanced objective. There's a blank space for you to write what you would like to do in your warm-up, or what you will do in your warm-up, and it can be review. Remember that task that you gave them to do at home and come back to class with. That is a good way to warm up and review. If it's a continuation of something or a carryover. And the introduction, what you will do in the introduction, and the presentation. And the thing that is different from your typical lesson plan form here, because this is MESL, is the practice is broken down into 3 different likability groups. So what you will do in each group, or what each group is going to be practicing. Now, in this next slide, we're going to look at what that could look like, and we're going, and it will really help guide you in your homework. We're good on our time. So this is from the video lesson that we watched, and this is what it would look like put into this form. And of course, it goes down into evaluation and application as well. You remember that she warmed up with total physical response activity about personal characteristics. Her introduction was she was asking a lot of questions, and she used a magazine picture and asked the students to describe the man or identify a man using those visuals. In her presentation, she told that personal story about a robbery that, terrible, that she was involved with herself. And she asked questions about the story and used sentence strips to summarize facts about a police report. Now, interesting to note, and keep this in mind, we saw her go back and make an additional presentation. And that kind of takes out the trepidation and fear about confusing your beginning learners in that whole group presentation, because you know that you can always go back and present again to them when you're in the practice stage. Your advanced and intermediate groups are working on their activities. So, so you might want to plug in what you're going to go over again with your beginning level likability group. So in the practice, I have it broken down. The advanced group, this is inverted, isn't it? But anyway, the advanced group is working in groups of 3, or they were working in groups of 3 to talk about, create a role play. That was fun, about a robbery or events in a crime. The intermediate group was working in groups of 3. Remember, they had the picture sequences and they had to describe the events in a robbery, put the sequence in order. And then the beginning groups, they were working on a dialogue. And that was the additional presentation. That's what she did with them first. Remember, a dialogue about making an emergency phone call, and that's when bring, 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 she was doing the role play about what to say, and they were practicing saying, my name is, my address is, that information. Going down into, again, the advanced group also, besides creating a role play, they were formulating questions about a picture sequence that they were going to use in a cross-ability activity. Now, for the cross-ability activity, the advanced students asked questions. That's when the advanced and intermediate groups were joined together, were put into cross-ability groups, new groups made with different levels, the advanced and intermediate students together, and the advanced students asked questions and the intermediate students responded to questions about their picture sequence robbery. At the same time, the beginning students were practicing yes, no, and WH questions about identifying someone, because that's a useful skill, describing what somebody at a crime scene looks like. And I see some questions in the chat. And then remember, there was a student peer working, asking, practicing those questions. And then the evaluation, a student presented role plays in the class to the whole class. That was a closing activity and an evaluation for the advanced group. Students completed an autograph activity. Now, when I saw autograph activity, I'm going to pull up the chat for a minute. I want to see what you're asking, because asking about the form. Thank you for chiming in, I guess, Kevin. This form is on the Moodle. It's in the Moodle, and you're going to get it. You're going to have a blank form. You will download it, and you will type into it and upload it. There's instructions, very clear instructions about what to do. Don't worry if when the time comes you have trouble, you can reach out and we will help you. So let me just wrap this up. An autograph activity, I really don't exactly know what that means, but it might be an old term that refers to a checklist, like when somebody signs off on something, like a checklist. I did this, I did this. It's kind of a self-evaluation. And then finally, in the application, the instructor has written down that she's going to ask students to find a picture of a person, describe it to a friend, and bring it back to school the next day for the next lesson for follow-up and warm-up. So that is a wonderful. Oh, yes. Okay. Like the bingo game and the icebreaker, kind of like find someone who, right? Right. Okay. You know, Kevin and I talked about that yesterday, and we thought that may be what that was like. Anyway, you can use this as a guide when you're making your own lesson. We're coming to the end of our time together, but I just want to remind you, this doesn't have to be a brand new lesson that you're creating from scratch. It can be a lesson that you've already done in the past. You're just going to superimpose it into this kind of thinking about arranging your multi-level lesson plan.